everybody. My name is Marilyn Zakhour. I'm the founder and CEO of Cosmic Centaurs, and I'm so excited to be welcoming all of you here for our second yearly edition of the Future of Teams conference. This year, as you know, we're exploring the topic of team dynamics, and particularly in distributed settings. And you know, at Cosmic, we're really core believers in the power of people coming together to create something that's bigger than the sum of their parts. Anyone who's ever spoken to me has heard me say that. And to everyone in our team, you know, true team collaboration is the stuff of magic. And we spend all of our time obsessing about how we can improve collaboration, resilience, innovation, and happiness in teams. For the next 2 days, we're going to be right here on LinkedIn Live, on Facebook Live, today and tomorrow with 15 incredible speakers joining us. We have 4 panels, we have a debate. We also have 2 workshops taking place on Thursday, July 8th, one around team identity and the other around rituals, which you can sign up for on our website, cosmiccentaurs.com. And of course, our upcoming keynote presentation. And without further ado, let's get the game started. Hey, Mark.
Hey, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I couldn't be more excited to be welcoming you as our first guest and our keynote speaker. I'm going to go ahead and, do the official reading of your bio, and then I'll hand things over to you so you can tell us all about the challenges of hybrid work. So,
sounds good.
Quick intro here. Mark Mortensen is a professor and former area chair of organizational behavior at INSEAD. He speaks, consults, and publishes widely on how to design collaboration at both the team and organization levels, drawing on over 20 years of experience in the field. His work focuses on the changing nature of collaboration with an emphasis on remote, global, and virtual work, as well as new forms of organizing like Agile Holacracy and the gig economy. He's pioneered research on the effects of multi-teaming, as well as dynamic staffing. He uses his consulting experience, as well as data-driven scientific research, to help executives and organizations understand the complex dynamics of organizations as social systems, and his focus is on applying scientific knowledge to distill the complexity into concrete, actionable tools that create value. Mark, of course, publishes regularly in practitioner outlets like the Harvard Business Review, the Sloan Management Review, IESE Insights, as well as popular press outlets, both in print and online. And his scholarly work has been published in top-tier academic publications, and his contributions are recognized through academic awards and leadership and editorial board positions. And on a personal note, Mark has been an amazing friend and a mentor, and he's helped me think through so many of the concepts underlying our work. And every conversation I've had with him has been both inspiring and energizing, and I'm certain that you will all feel this way today. Mark, help us unpack the challenges of hybrid work. Over to you.
Thank you so much, Marilyn. A very, very kind, very voluminous intro. Hi, everyone out there. As Marilyn said, I'm kind of the hybrid and virtual work guy. It's what I've been studying for far too long. I'm far too old, but that's okay. But what I really am passionate about is helping people to actually understand how virtual and hybrid and all these all these different ways in which we are working these days are affecting our ability not just to do the work, but also the way to relate to one another. And that's where I think also the work that Marilyn and her whole team are doing is so important, because it's really hooking in the human side. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. My overall plan, my game plan for this, keeping with the sports metaphors, is I'm going to spend probably, give or take, about 20 minutes just to give a few sort of semi-prepared remarks and some thoughts, a little bit of a frame and a way to think about this stuff. And then I'm going to open it up, and we will open it up to a general conversation to hear what's top of mind for you. Because much as I am the organizational behavior kind of warm and fuzzy, get in touch with your feelings guy, I'm actually a recovering engineer. So I like solving problems, and we want to solve your problems. We want to try to figure out what's going on. So with that, I'm going to jump in. I'm going to show you just a few slides to give you a little bit of a sense of the type of stuff that I'm talking about. And so let's get started. So as I said, what I really want to talk about is the changing landscape of collaboration. And when I talk about the changing landscape, it's a broad framing, and that's intentional because there's a lot of stuff going on that's all kind of interconnected. You've got, well, of course, we all know that people have been working remote because thanks to COVID, we haven't had any choice. people have been doing that for actually quite a long time. One of my good oldest friends, he did research on the Hudson Bay Company. And anybody who's Canadian or has Canadian roots knows about HBC, right? This is a company that currently or recently has been department stores, but before that was trappers up in the northeast of Canada and the United States hunting furs back in the 1600s and the 1500s. And they were working as a remote virtual organization. So this isn't new stuff, but we know, thanks to COVID and everything else, remote exploded. But now we're sort of morphing a little bit. It's not just remote, but it's also working hybrid. As Marilyn mentioned, there's also a bunch of other stuff. There's this whole, I don't work on one thing, I work on 5, and I have to bounce back and forth between these projects. We're not just bouncing between different projects. Some of the people are here, some of the people are there. Again, the virtual stuff, but we now also have to deal with the fact that we move in and out of projects dynamically and fluidly. I'm not working on one project with you the whole time. I'm working with you on one project, but also with 3 or 4 other people on 4 or 5 or 6 other projects. And we're moving in and out and adjusting over time. And then add in all the other fun stuff people like to talk about, Agile Holacracy. There's a lot. I'm not going to cover all of it, but I'm going to touch on all of it. And the reason is, as I said, these things are interconnected. What that means is the types of things that help you understand and function well in an agile environment, in a holacratic environment, are actually many of the same tools, tips, tricks, and skills that help you work when you're working remote or working hybrid. It's actually the same basic skill set. But without any further ado, let me get into that. So we know the times are changing, right? Bob Dylan said it a long time ago. It was true then. It's still true now. It's just different things that are changing. What I think is important to keep in mind, however, and to recognize is there's a massive range of different opinions. There's a range of opinions in terms of people's thoughts on how time is, how things are changing, and not just how things are changing, but what are the impacts. And I'm just going to give you a few. Let me put some of these up here for you. What we've got is a whole host of people who are saying basically, look, on some cases, right, we have Reed Hastings saying there's really no positive. I don't see any positive about people not getting together. It's really a pure negative when people are spread further apart. You have other people saying, it's harder, CEO of DocuSign, it's harder to delineate work and personal time. The CEO of WeWork pretty famously came out with a pretty pointed statement. People who work from home are the least engaged. I don't know the causality he was inferring, but that's what he said. But then we have folks on the other end that say, look, we haven't just coped, we've actually thrived. We've done really well with this. And data shows that it's been successful. During the last few months, we've flattened hierarchies through digital technologies. People are more productive. There's a huge range. And part of that is leaving people, well, to be honest, a little confused. And I'm working with a lot of different companies right now trying to make sense of this. And a lot of people are confused. So is this a good thing or a bad thing? How do we make sense of this? Is this net just a loss where we're all going, oh, I can't wait for this virtual hybrid thing to be over? Or are we saying, oh, this is amazing. My world has opened, life is great now. And I think what we see is there's sort of, there's polarization. And it's important that we separate out the truth and the science and the fact from the rhetoric and the hype. So on the one hand, we have the people who are saying, look, offices are dead. We are all going to work forever in shorts and a t-shirt with no shoes on the beach. That's it. Right? No more office. And we've got people on the other end who are saying, look, this is just a blip. It happened. We're going back to the office. We're forcing you back into the office, or you're all missing what's there. You miss the conversation, the collegiality, the informal interactions. Look, all of these are accurate. I think anybody listening to this is going to recognize the reality is somewhere in the middle, right? It has to be. It has to be some sort of a hybrid. And when I say hybrid, I'm using the term in a very broad sense. I'm basically saying any environment in which we are constantly mixing between having somebody right here next to me and somebody who's in 2 dimensions on a flat screen somewhere in front of me. And the number of people, the composition, the balance, the amount of time, what the times are, all of that may be in flux. That's fine. But all of these are characteristics of what we're talking about when we talk about hybrid. Now, that's still not easy. And this is the number one question I'm getting right now, talking at all levels, whether it's ex-cos down to people who are actually getting their hands dirty and doing the work. People are saying, this whole hybrid thing, it's freaking me out. Somebody recently said, look, I see more angst about hybrid working than I ever did about dealing with COVID and working remote in the first place, or half of the business issues we had before that. So the question is why? Why is it so tricky? And this is the little bit of framing I want to give you before we open up for the questions. In my conversations with a number of leaders, something became very clear. The reason this is difficult is because it's actually a tension. It's a tension, and I'm going to argue for 3 dimensions. You could play around, maybe you can add some more, that's totally fine. But there are at least 3 that we have to keep in mind. And it's a 3-way tension. And not only that, it's actually 3 almost different conversations. And this is where the challenge is coming in, because in a lot of cases, in a lot of organizations, the folks dealing with this, trying to think about this, again, at whatever level, are having 3 different conversations without realizing it. They think they're having one conversation about, so what do we do about this hybrid thing? But in fact, they're 3 different conversations. I want to tell you a little bit about what those are. The first one is a conversation around effectiveness. It's basically saying, look, can I deliver what I need to deliver to whoever my stakeholders are, whether that is internal stakeholders in the organization, whether that's my clients, I don't care who they are, but whoever I am beholden to produce something, to give something to, am I able to deliver in whatever is the format that we're talking about? And again, I'm being agnostic to what exactly it looks like. But the important thing is this is a conversation about productivity, about effectiveness. And we've seen lots of articles about, so are people more or less effective when they're working from home? What's the answer? Is it 4? Is it 7? We need a number. Important, critically important, because look, if you're not delivering, there's no real reason to be in business. But there's a second piece. The second piece has to do with staffing. And this is the one that's being hyped a lot in the news, right? You see all these studies, these surveys that say, look, 3 out of 4 employees say they will quit their job if they're not offered flexible work, remote working, the ability to choose their own hours, work from wherever, all the stuff. First of all, take it with a big grain of salt. A lot of those surveys, they ask you, so will you quit your job if you don't get remote? It's really easy to say, yes, of course I will. It's much harder to actually quit your job. So thinking about it, talking a big game, not the same thing. We are not actually going to see as many people as is purported, but we will see some. And there's no question. I used to travel every month, at least 3 times a month. And then I went through about a year of not traveling. Turns out my family likes me. Turns out I actually like being home. So I'm not willing to go back to exactly what I was doing, but I know I'm going to have to do something in the middle. And that seems to be the modal reaction of a lot of people. As you can recognize, we've got 2 conversations. We are optimizing on 2 different dimensions. And there may be solutions that are ideal for attracting talent, but we actually can't deliver. Or actually allow us to deliver really well, but scare off all the talent that we say, people are our most valuable resource we need. But unfortunately, there's a 3rd dimension. That has to do with the social fabric of the organization. And I've spent a good bit of time thinking, because again, I'm the organizational behavior guy. I've spent a bunch of time thinking and writing some articles about this. Issues like building and maintaining trust and psychological safety when you're in an environment that is virtual and remote and hybrid. It's not clear how exactly we do that or what some of the challenges are. Issues like isolation and loneliness, feelings of connectivity that are being dissolved, the lack of social relationships in the office, which makes relationships much more one-dimensional. The most common question I got amidst all the COVID stuff was, how do I socialize a new employee? I don't mean socialize like, hey, let's all go out and have a drink and have some fun. I'm talking socialize like, I need to bring somebody into my organization. They need to understand what it means to be us in order to be able to deliver and be one of us. And I don't know how to do that if they're not actually here. If I can't walk them down the hallway, if I can't say, hey, look, here's Marilyn. She's super awesome. Let me introduce you. Here's Tala. She's equally awesome. Let me introduce you too. Those conversations are actually really important. This is the social fabric piece. And as you can already figure out, right, I drew it as a Venn diagram, not by accident. Just like the other two, you can optimize on really maintaining a strong culture and sacrifice the other two, and vice versa. And they don't. So all three of these are not wholly independent, but do operate independently. You can pull on any one and adjust. And here's the part that makes this conversation even more annoying and difficult. These are driven by what are arguably almost ideological beliefs about what creates value for a company. Quick thought experiment. I guarantee, think about your organization or the people that you work with. If you're a freelancing gig, whatever, it doesn't matter. I am quite sure you can think of somebody who basically views the way we create value in our organization. It's all about what we do. It's about the processes. It's about getting the work done. That's it. All that matters is delivering. I'm quite sure you can also think about somebody, likely a different person, who basically says, it's all about the people. Give me the right people. I've got it set. And somebody else who says, guys, it's all about that intangible stuff in the ether. So one of the challenges, we have these three dimensions. And if you want, and I'll give you a link at the very end, if you're interested with a bunch of articles, this is where this stuff is written up if you want to go back and sort of rehash some of the things. But I want to talk to you a little bit about each of these different dimensions. And that's sort of to set the stage for the rest of our conversation. So let's talk about effectiveness, right? Here are the typical questions that I'm being hit with when people are trying to sort of sort out this whole effectiveness debate. One, does work from home kill innovation? Is it what are the kind of employees that can produce remotely? This is two flavors of this question that I often get. One is, give me, I need like a questionnaire that I can ask to find out what is a remote able employee. And which are the ones that aren't? Can you give me that so I can be like, yes, this person, you get to be remote. You no. Or something about jobs, right? What are the jobs that can be done remotely or not, and what works, what doesn't? What's the optimal ratio of home and balance? How long can you sustain effective remote work? Recognize a lot of people have pushed through this process, survived working remotely, but then after a while, this whole process starts to wear on them. It starts to get difficult. It starts to get tricky. And recognize working from home introduces new challenges. You're about to see one because there's a garbage truck that's about to drive by this window. Oh, nope, he's going that way. He's going to come at one point. At some point, there's going to be some background noise and a big, ugly green and white truck going down and some guys throwing some cans around. That's remote work. How well do we factor this in to understanding what makes us effective? So when we think about this thing, we have to recognize is, I've heard this too. Lots of people saying, look, it's going a lot better than we expected. We've transitioned. In fact, I think this whole virtual thing, we kind of nailed it. But it comes with risks. We have lots of data that immediately already shows people are working longer hours. And I was just reading, there's a great HBR piece by Sarah Green Carmichael about that looks at the data and shows working longer hours over time is not effective. It is actually net a loss. We tend, and there's lots of reasons in terms of our own productivity, in terms of increased risks, in terms all sorts of things. But recognize just because you've survived well through COVID does not mean you have a sustainable model for delivering value going forward. So that brings us back to our questions. How do we think about it? My push here is you have to think contextually. You have to think about how different people and tasks are. So there's not a one size fits all kind of solution. It's not just saying, look, this is what we do for everybody. You have to start thinking about how we fit the pieces together. So let's talk context. And I'll give you an interesting example. I was having a conversation with a very good friend of mine at Amazon, and she said, look, here's the problem that we have. Somebody who works in a fulfillment center, lovely place right here, they can't work remote, right? I can't say, hey, do this stuff from home, right? Because they don't have boxes and things that they can send around. That was my microphone stand. I have to put it back. There we go. So they don't have boxes that they can send from home. They're in the fulfillment center. So that person can't work from home. But what do I do when I have two people hired at the same level, at the same grade? One goes into fulfillment center. One happens to go into back office customer support. Hey, back office person, they get to work from home whenever they want. And remember, we said this is a perk people are looking for now. They're going to be pretty happy. But the person who's in the fulfillment center sweating and moving the boxes around may be saying, well, I want to work remote. Why don't I get to? And for those who say, but that's, I don't deal in boxes and fulfillment. I do intellectual work. I do fancy stuff. Great. Same thing happens in biotech, right? You work in a lab. Most biotechs, most pharmas don't say, here's a pathogen. Go home, play around with it in your basement, see what happens, right? That's how bad things happen. So we need to think about maybe not only who gets to work, but maybe even rethinking job design. What if the solution for the folks at Amazon is to say, so instead of splitting the job based on you work in the fulfillment center, you work in the back office customer support, what if we slice them sideways? You do fulfillment center 2 days a week and you do customer support 3 days a week. There's a famous, fantastic case I have taught for about 20 years. This sounds really bad, but it's a great case on a company called Lincoln Electric in the United States that weathered depressions and everything without laying off any employees. One of the things they did, they made stick welders, welding equipment. They took people, when they were in a real severe downturn, they took the people making the tools and they flipped it around and they started them selling them. There's nobody better to sell something than the person who's built it for the last 20 years. Worked really, really well. So the point is, we may actually have to start rethinking even things like job design around work from home and flexible work as a perk or as a thing that we offer. Now, coming back to where we were saying, right, we said, look, there's this sort of staffing discussion. And the argument here is saying, look, the talent market wants work from home. Here's a nice piece of data coming out of HBR. How often do people want to work from home? Great. So all the evidence seems to say everyone wants to work from home. But remember, it's not the same for everyone. I have 3 kids. They will be going to summer camp in, if I can see what time it is, about 20 minutes. So you'll probably hear some of the commotion with that. Actually, only 2 of them will. The third one is too little, and she'll be running around here causing pandemonium. Stress is not felt evenly by all people. Being a parent, having elder parents that you're taking care of, having anything personal affects the way in which you're able to deal with and think about and cope with remote virtual work and all these factors. So bottom line, something that I have argued for many, many years, when you think about how do you fix something like work from home, I've always talked about this in relation to remote work in general. It's not about work from home versus office. It's about the experience of work from home versus the experience of the office. So 2 things. Number 1, don't assume everyone experiences the same physical, mechanical work from home, office, etc. schedule the same way. And the second piece is that experience is not always true. It's not always accurate, right? And let's think about what happened in Silicon Valley amidst the big boom, right? I was in Silicon Valley in the beginning of it. And all through there in Silicon Valley, you started seeing this big push. Everybody had to have the coolest office. Who has a ball pit? Do you have a slide? We have a slide. We have a barista. He draws the most kick-ass flat whites you could imagine. How good is your barista? This was now the competing ground to hire talent, right? We have a whole basketball court. It's amazing. This sort of stuff starts to become what people are competing on. But here's the problem. Just like I said before, just because you say you're going to work from home doesn't mean, and you need this in order to keep working there, doesn't mean that you're actually going to. You need to own the narrative. One of the things that I'm seeing a lot of companies wrestling with is people say, I need to be able to work from home because I love working from home. Remind people also, look, working from home is great. I love it. I'm going to keep doing it. But you do sometimes have to remind people about what they're losing when they're not in the office. Hey, the office does actually allow you to connect with people in a fundamentally different way. It helps you to understand things about the way they're working, what they're doing, how they think about things in a very critical way. It's not just a nice to have. This is actually the oil that keeps the organizational machinery going. So one of the things that I want to push you on as well is don't just think about trying to fix the problem. Think about owning the narrative around what work from home, hybrid working and everything actually means. And speaking of narrative, let's talk about one, and I'll give you a couple stories to sort of round this out. Let's think about commuting. It's the number one thing that has been the big win that I've heard from people is, look, I saved so much time. Commuting was the bane of my existence. I would get in there. Here we have some lovely Bay Area traffic. On the left-hand side, we have the Paris Metro. Neither one is somewhere that you really want to spend a lot of time. People would say, this is the big plus. Now that I'm working from home, I don't have to do this. Here's my pushback. Think for a second. I guarantee many of you listening have felt the same thing. And I save about an hour each way in commuting time. Ask yourself what you did in that hour. I'm pretty sure some of you caught up on email. Hopefully not. If you're driving, I hope you didn't catch up on email. If you were in the train, catching up on email, reading. If you were driving, maybe listening to some audiobooks, doing some phone calls, or even just decompressing. Those were actually important things. So when we talk about the narrative, let me use this to echo, and I'll anchor on two other quick little pieces. Number one, a conversation I had with a good friend of mine who works at Total. And he said, look, one of the things we realized that we were losing, that we hadn't even recognized, was normally after every meeting, we all go and we grab coffee. Kind of a normal thing. If you don't like coffee, you can have some tea. If you don't like tea, you can have some water. You can have whatever you want. But the point is, we all go together, we meet, and we talk. The question is what we did in that talking. And two things that they hadn't realized were happening in those meetings. One, sometimes Marilyn is awesome, but you know what? We can disagree. We can get into a fight. We can argue, and we can really get into it. And sometimes what we would then need is to leave that meeting, go have a coffee, and while we're sitting there and saying, here's why I was annoyed. And we have that debrief. And afterwards, we both say, okay, now I get it, right? Collective construction, also social facilitation, relationship repair, collective sense making, all these things were happening in those meetings. And they realized that now that they were doing a bunch of meetings remote and virtual and working from home, they didn't have that time. They actually built it back in with fabricated time to do this stuff. And then the last one, speaking of narratives, there's one other thing that has turned out to be a very common theme. People saying, look, when I used to commute, I had an hour from those really tense meetings until I got home. By the time I got home, I was then decompressed. I was no longer tense, and I was my own delightful parent, and I was a good person. Now, when I work from home, where I typically am, when I'm back in Paris, I'm working downstairs in the basement. It takes me exactly 6 seconds to get upstairs. If I've been in the middle of a nasty, annoying, frustrating meeting, I'm pissed off at my colleagues, I go upstairs, I haven't had a chance to shed that. And that's actually a really important piece. I come up and I have to be really mindful when I'm immediately attacked by my kids with a bunch of problems or something else, that I don't displace and take the stuff from work and give it to them. As a little tongue-in-cheek example, I heard about one executive who every morning would get up, get dressed, go sit down, have breakfast with the family. At the end of the breakfast, kiss everyone on the head, goodbye everyone, walk out the front door, the door would slam, then they would come back in the front door, go down into the basement office, do their entire day of work. When they were done with their day of work, they walked out the front door, door would slam, open the door, hi family, I'm home. And they fabricated a transition in order to allow them to make this shift. So I want to make sure that we leave time. So what I'm going to do is this other piece around the social fabric. I'm sure some of the stuff that you have questions about, I just want to flag two things just to give you something to think about, and then we will open it up for the questions and discussion and all that. Number one, we have seen what we're calling a crisis of trust. And some of you, I know, as soon as I say this, some people say, but not us. We trust our people. We're not that. Not everyone does. Not everyone trusts their people. And I guarantee even in your most super awesome, happy, warm, fuzzy, trusting environment, some of you don't trust one another as much as you think. The challenge is when we work remotely, we're missing a lot of the information that we would normally use to build trust. There's a second piece around this, around psychological safety. It's a critical component for basically anything in our organizations. One of the things that we've been looking at, this is some work I did with Amy Edmondson at Harvard, is we figured out that there's a new conversation that's being had, because as the boundaries between work and home are being brought down and we're having to work together all the time, and these two worlds are coming together, some of the things that used to be off the table, I would never ask you about your home life, now have to be on the table because that home life is involved in the scheduling process. So we give some recommendations there. And then the other piece has to do with loneliness, and also where we've been seeing there's greater feelings of isolation and loneliness within our workforce, but it's not a COVID effect. It's actually about the way in which we're designing our teams and designing our work. And the last piece is around power dynamics in hybrid environments, and this ties in all the other pieces. We're seeing lots and lots of issues where power is coming up, basically because we have different amounts of face-time interaction, access to resources for different people. And so that's one of the really big challenges that we've got. So with that, I think I will jump. Sorry, Marilyn, I'm going to do two things. One, I want to give one last thought. Sorry, I have to get this one last thought in. It's really important though, because this one's it's really important. Last thing for you to think about. I've been hearing a lot of people talking about, hey, I'm really looking forward to getting back to normal. And now as vaccines have increased and at least rates look like they're going down for now, variants, etc. notwithstanding, great, we're getting back into the swing of things. I want to issue a warning, which is it looks really bright and sunny, but don't forget to stop and think about and try to understand how this whole process has affected you and your people. And this is something I'm seeing a lot. We're hearing more and more conversations around burnout. Don't get lulled into the false trap of, good, we can put this behind us. We need time to make sense of what has happened, to deal with it and understand. There's a lot more to talk about this. We can bring this up in the conversation. And so there I was going to put up my little thank you slide, not just for the thank you, but importantly for those who want, you can scan the little QR code in the upper right, and that'll bring you to where there's all the articles that I was talking about, the background and the research and the nerdy stuff. It's all there if you want to take a look at that. Now I'm going to shut up and I'm going to hand it back over to Marilyn so that we can have a conversation and hear what all of you out there in the world are thinking about.
Wow, thanks so much, Mark. You've given us so much to think about, and obviously there's a lot of questions waiting for you. So I'm going to try and make sure we get through many of them. Maybe not all of them, but many of them. I'm going to start you off, kind of try and follow your flow, and I do want to spend a lot of time on the social fabric aspect, because you and I spend a lot of time discussing that. But let me get a question out of the way that always comes back, and I think it's a fair question, and you kind of addressed it around how do you make that decision. So you did talk about making sure that you design experiences. But I wonder if we could, different people in the feed, so Jay being one of them, asked about manufacturing. Different people asked about which industries are the right one. Maybe I'll share the way that we help people think through it. And then you can tell me maybe some mental models that you help kind of leaders think through when they're making this kind of decision.
Yep.
There are a few simple ones. One you brought up, right, around, do you have dependency on machinery, right? Do you have dependency on objects? And in fact, in the history of the office, this is one of the reasons why people started coming together, because of manufacturing. The other is we talk them through, analyzing roles and figuring out if there is task complexity and if there is interdependence. And then in that sense, figuring out how much time people have to spend together. What are some of these kind of simple frameworks or simple questions that can constitute the beginning of an assessment of what makes sense for each organization?
You don't need me. You hit the sort of the two main ones that I would certainly start with, and I'll add one more. So as you said, right, requirements of any concrete artifact that isn't easily translatable. Now, that could be physical things, right? You need to have access to this widget. You need to be able to look at that. But there's a process component as well. Certain tasks require, as you mentioned, it also depends on types of interdependence. Classically, we talk about you can have sequential interdependence. I give it to you, you give it to the next, etc. You can have reciprocal interdependence, where I hand it to you, you hand it back, we go back and forth. Or you can have pooled, where we all look down at the same thing and we're all working on it collectively. It's not a simple thing about, well, manufacturing or not, because look, manufacturing is radically different across different fields and different types of manufacturing. You need to break down to the level of the task and think about what people are actually doing. The good news is there's no magic here. Common sense is a great guide, as long as you remember to stop and go through that process. So look at the tasks you're doing and ask yourself, where do I break down? Where do I need other people? Where are the interaction points? Classically, we talk about, when you think about designing organizations, how do you group people together? How do you link those groups? And then how do you ensure alignment between those? You need to basically ask, where are the breakdown, the failure points? And one simple rule of thumb we typically talk about in org design is you want your organization to somewhat map onto your process. If you have pieces of the process that are run independently, you can run those as independent units. If you have pieces of the process that have to be done lockstep, you don't want those things going on their own, because then they're going to get out of sync and out of whack, and you're going to run into some problems. So it really needs to be at that level of the pieces and thinking about that. Just do that breakdown at the task level, at the work level. And then, of course, we get into all the stuff with the social fabric, et cetera, which we'll get into.
Yeah, and I find that reassuring myself, because these are all fundamentals of organizational design, right? It's not like we had to invent them for the pandemic. It's also why I spend so much time in the academic research, because there is so much to be learned from the past, right? And these are decisions that have been made before. And you gave us the example of LinkedIn kind of getting a bit creative on how they divide jobs, right? Essentially, if we had to boil it down to a concept. Are there any other examples, historical or not, where we can kind of observe interesting decision-making around not just where people work from, that's only one form of flexibility, but also when they start or end work, what their contract looks like, how they contribute to an organization? Because I think we've kind of focused the debate so much on where people are working from. Are there any interesting examples that you like the story of?
It's a tough one. And one of the challenges here is everybody always wants, as you said, everyone wants the interesting one. Ooh, the cool one. The problem is, what makes something interesting is usually because it's very unique, which means it's idiosyncratic, which means it's hard to replicate, and it doesn't apply as well. What I would actually push you on is to think about some other stuff. Think instead about something like shift work. We've been doing shift work forever. Guess what? Shift work is the same thing as working across time zones. It's just that the people in the different time zones are actually in the same physical place. They're just in different time zones in the same place. Think about sales. For years and years and years, people in sales roles and organizations have been spending half their time on the road. They've been working with other clients. They've been there at the client site doing all this stuff. And that in and of itself, that's just like working remote, working hybrid. So we actually have many of the answers to these tasks, these problems, these challenges in our organizations and in the history of our organizations. We just haven't been, we're not used to thinking of it that way. And I think I would push people more towards that than towards the, ooh, what's the really cool one? Because the reason it's cool and unique is usually because it doesn't apply anywhere else. And then people are like, great, well, that's a great story, but it won't work for us. And there you go.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. One executive we worked with, said it very beautifully to me. He said, look, we're a 100-year-old company. We've done change before. It's not the first time. We have to figure this out.
We did it once in 1902. Yeah,
exactly. And every world war. And, I think there's a couple of great audience questions around, the the social fabric aspect. So here Rita asks, how do you build an environment of psychological safety in teams that are distributed or organized in complex ways, some working from home, some in other countries? You know, multinationals have had this problem forever. That's another reassuring fact. And also some people choosing to be at the office because that's what they're comfortable with. How do you make sure that everyone feels safe, secure, and implicated?
So, I'll cheat in the sense of I encourage you take a look. Because we just wrote this article with the article I wrote with Amy Edmondson on psychological safety in hybrid environments. And I'll tell you what we talk about there, but we go into more depth. A few different things that I think are important to keep in mind. One, psychological safety has to be a conversation. It has to be a discussion. It has to be an open conversation. Here's a chicken and egg problem. You need psychological safety to talk about having psychological safety. It's tough. Here's where what you need is the people who are psychologically safe based on their position, based on their character, right? If you're the person who says, look, I'm good, doesn't matter, I am tough, I am mighty, I am not afraid of anything, then you need to be the one who steps out there and says, and so I am going to show real vulnerability. And it's one of the things that we counsel leaders on all the time. Forgive my language. We're not talking about the bullshit vulnerability. We're not talking about the yes, as CEO, when I flew in on my jet, it was risky because I had to, I was worried the press might not like my jet, but I did it anyway. Come on, that's not psychological safety. What we need is the people who feel safe, who are safe, need to use that to the advantage of the group to say, look, I'm going to tell you how I actually am scared, right? I'm scared that I don't know the solution to this problem and this company might really struggle. Real vulnerability is the critical first step towards getting the people who don't feel as safe to open up. Baby steps. Don't say, okay, we'll have psychological safety, and now everybody tell us your deepest, darkest. Is not going to happen. Small baby steps, little things, and police. You need to be careful. Sorry, just the one thing I want to flag. You have a really important role as a leader and as a team member. If you see behavior that is psychologically unsafe or could be seen that way, you need to jump on it. Do it in a psychologically safe way. Don't attack the people and say, you're not being psychologically safe. Now you're a horrible person. That's not psychological safety. But you need to be quick when you see an infraction, because trust and psychological safety take a long time to build, seconds to break.
So actually, I want to dig deeper on this one. I have two questions for you. So the first one is, what kind of information or experience do you have that you can share with us around this concept of vulnerability, right? It's culturally also very different. There are some cultures where being vulnerable is a complete kind of destruction of the self, right? It's not okay. It's not even mildly acceptable. I come from one of them. How do you see this variation across cultures, and how do you kind of help to navigate that? That's my first half of my question. And the second half is, as you said, sometimes it's still going to happen. We're all human. We're all going to break trust, safety, protocols without even realizing it. Right. Maybe also, could you talk me through how you return from a point where you've broken trust? Yep.
So number one, 100% right. There's massive range throughout the world in how readily or how quickly people feel able to trust and to have psychological safety, to just dive into that. That doesn't mean that they can't, and to be vulnerable. That was, that's what I was thinking, but didn't verbalize. That doesn't mean that they can't be vulnerable. That just means it doesn't come naturally, and it's not the immediate reaction. I have had in conversations about real vulnerability within cultures where that is not okay, but it takes some time. And part of it also takes some framing. Part of it also is around getting people to buy into saying, look, me admitting that I don't know the answer, it's actually not a sign of vulnerability. That's a sign of strength. That is a sign of confidence, that I am willing to say, look, Great. So I don't know the answer. I'm still here. I'm still doing what I'm doing, and I'm still capable of doing that. So part of this is a framing conversation, because you can't make it go away. It will be there. This challenge will be there. But you can switch the conversation, and you're going to have to help people along the way. The baby steps go for the people who are trying to share that, to expose that. Now, your second question.
How do you unbreak trust?
How do you unbreak the trust? You don't unbreak it. You rebuild it. The first most important, best thing is be open, address it. The worst thing you can do is say, "Oh, you broke the trust." I'm certainly not going to tell you about that. You should just know. And it's like this is every bad romantic comedy movie with like, well, they should just know. You should know what you said, because that isn't reality. You need to be open. You need to say, "Look, let's be honest. Here's what you said, and here's why." And do not forget the why piece, because the problem is you want to make sure that people don't internalize it in the wrong way as well. The message is, I can't say anything. And we're seeing this where people hype about cancel cultures and other. You can't say anything because people get worried. No. What you need to do is you need to say, "Look, I heard, here's what you said. Here's the reason this was a problem for me." And the person who has the problem also has to be psychologically safe. They need to share and say, "Look, give the person the benefit of the doubt. Maybe you didn't mean to. Maybe you're not a horrible person. Maybe you're not actually a soulless machine. Maybe you just made a mistake. We all make mistakes." So what you need to focus on is, this is a collectively owned thing. We own psychological safety. We need to build and maintain psychological safety. As a leader, yes, there's some stuff that I can do extra special, extra much, because I'm the leader. But as a group, we need to work together to do it, to maintain it, to create it, and to ensure that it survives. There will inevitably be drops. We need to make sure that we cover that.
Yeah, absolutely. And speaking of drops, actually, there's a question from the audience from Shayaf. He says he hadn't thought about the downsides of the hybrid remote work model. Mm-hmm. You brought up things like burnout, longer work hours, no separation. Yep. I know you also have spoken quite a bit about loneliness, and Shayaf is asking, like, what else should we look out for? And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the loneliness aspect. Sure. I was listening to a podcast this week, the Knowledge Project, around loneliness, and the data around the impact of loneliness on not just physical and mental health, but societies, communities, economies is quite huge. And I'd love for you to speak towards that a little bit.
Absolutely. Can you do me a favor? Can I put up one slide just for a second? I want to show, because I want to share one thing, right? Loneliness has been in the news everywhere, and we're seeing it right, left, and center. You name it, it's there. And we heard much the same thing when we talked to executives. But as I mentioned before, this was before COVID. Here's what I want to flag, and here's what I want to put up in front of you. These are some of the comments we got from executives we were talking to, and they said things like, "Look, I'm a contractor, so there's this line between am I one of you or am I not one of you? I'm on the outside." One of my favorites is the one in the upper left-hand corner. Every Monday, somebody comes and tells me they were assigned to something, and the other guy who worked on it just left. Big groups and distant groups. Teams are more transient. I have different hats for different teams. This is the piece of the puzzle. Now we can kill the slide. That was the one thing I want to show, was some of the data underlying this. The challenge is, when it comes to loneliness, it's not just I'm working from home, so I don't get to see my office, my office mates. I don't get to pet them and say, "Oh, I miss you. I can touch you. I can smell you. I can," that's not the only piece. A big piece of this puzzle is pre-COVID, as we have been putting people on teams and in projects where they are constantly moving in and out. They're transient. They only spend a little amount of time. Plus, there's this sort of this idea of what we call commoditization, which is I don't actually need Marilyn. I need someone who can do what she does for 2 hours this week. And if it's Marilyn, great. If it's not Marilyn, great. I don't care. That's a tough thing for a lot of people to swallow, is that the organization doesn't need them. They need a unit of what they can do. However many that is, whatever the unit size is, what they can do is. And that's something that we're wrestling with. So coming back to the question, so, this is where this is coming from. What do we do about it? There are a few things. One, almost all of the things that I talk about, the first step is have a conversation, open up, have a discussion with people, and try to help them to understand what it is that's going on. And again, remember this whole point about it's not the thing, it's the experience of the thing. The second piece, however, is when we talk about isolation, we talk about loneliness, make sure people have a home. And what I mean by that, one of the things that we found was an effective tool is the idea of a home team, especially as we work on 4, 5, 6, 7, 12, 82, 49 different teams. We often are now in a situation where we don't feel grounded somewhere. So one of the things I often encourage leaders to think about is make sure at least everybody has a sense of home. I think back to when I was in high school, and we had different teachers for all different subjects, but we had a homeroom. That was a stupid thing. It didn't do anything. All it was the one place we went in for a small amount of time, and they checked to make sure you were there at school and you were doing what you were supposed to do, and then we left. But all of a sudden it was this really important core of, but which homeroom were you in? That was where your base was. Give people a home, give people a core team, and it plays a really important role.
I think that's a really very beautiful reference to just the fact that humans haven't evolved as fast as this pandemic has. And there are so many things that remain unchanged. And actually, there's a few questions in the audience about change. Peter asks, are we just going to go back? Is this just working now because we're all afraid of, the virus and we're staying put? Is that going to go away? Maya's asking the same question. Imad is also saying, is there really an end to the continuous adaptation, transformation? What are your thoughts around our ability to cope with change and how we can support people in kind of maybe building that muscle?
Yep. Okay. So the answer to all the questions is yes, which is, gives you a sense of how messy this whole situation is. So are we going to go back? This is a pendulum, like pretty much everything. Whenever we talk about change, whenever I teach on change, I always remind people it's like a pendulum. It swings back and forth. We always overcorrect and we swing back and forth. Now, the problem is you have to recognize what happens when you swing a pendulum. It hits the stuff that's underneath it, right? That's the heads of the employees. This is why change hurts. Change isn't fun because every time the pendulum swings, it's the employees that are getting whacked from side to side and having to adjust. So a couple of things to flag. Are we going to go wholly back to where things were before the pandemic? Absolutely not. And anybody who tells you it will all go back completely to where it was, come on. Of course it won't. But like I showed in that slide with the guy on the beach, it's also not a completely new world, unlike anything we've ever seen. It's going to be a mix. So I would encourage people, stop thinking in terms of the black and white. Are we going to go back or are we not? Think about yourself and realize everybody is just like you. I guarantee you have found some things that are nice about this new environment that you're going to want to keep. I guarantee there's some things about the office that you're going to want back. And I'll be fair. When I say I guarantee, there is a small fraction at the very tails of distribution who say literally, I never want to go back, and they genuinely mean it. Okay, good for them. They will find in this new environment something that works, and for that situation. In terms of, so that I think hopefully addresses this question of, are we going to go back? How do we help people deal with change? We have to recognize that change is difficult. We have to recognize that change triggers uncertainty. We don't like uncertainty. It's one of our most uncomfortable emotional states. And that's what has made COVID so difficult. That's why with this slide I showed with the little girl looking out, that's one of the reasons that we're in this situation dealing with this is we don't like uncertainty. We like the idea, something I can hold on to. It's stable. And we're desperately looking for an opportunity to have something to hold on to, something that will feel more stable. Here goes the truck. So you'll see, just a little change.
I heard that.
Change of scenery. There we go. So we need something that is more stable. We want that. One of the things you can do is you can help people find some stability. That doesn't mean you don't change things, but that means you're conscious and cognizant of what doesn't change. And you remind them of that. Look, we're going to a whole new hybrid work environment, but we still have the same core values and we care about them. We're changing the way in which we do all this stuff, but it's still the same people and the same relationships. And if I cared about you before, I'm going to care about you now, and we're going to maintain that. Give people, I often use a sort of a boating, sailing analogy. An anchor is a really important thing. We often think that it's the thing that holds us in place and doesn't let us move. You can also use an anchor to move yourself. It's a drag anchor. You throw it out there and you pull yourself along. An anchor just means you have something that's solid. And when you're in a storm, it's really reassuring to know there is an anchor, either a physical thing or even a point on the horizon, a lighthouse that anchors you spatially. It matters a lot.
Mark, we're almost at the end of our hour. I could stick around here for another hour if you ain't got nothing. But I really love what you said. And I think it's an opportunity, I think, for leaders and organizations to become human again and to reconnect with what that means. I think so many of the efforts and organizations of the last couple of centuries or more has been about industrializing human effort and finding efficiency, which is, where you started with your kind of 3-part framework. But a lot of it is moving towards efficiency isn't the problem anymore. We're not going to be able to revolutionize work with, what Ford did, but we can do new things. And I'm hopeful that the fact that we've all had to go through this moment together allows us to reconnect with our humanity and with what matters to us as human beings. Someone in the audience, Rama here today, she always says we're human beings, not human doings. And I think that that's a really beautiful way of putting it. I do want us to do our rapid fire questions. I hope you've prepared some answers. And these are questions that we'll be asking every single one of our panelists and making some playlists and some reading lists in the end. So let's go. Are you ready?
Sure.
All right. Question number 1. What's the skill that every leader needs to have today that maybe wasn't as important before?
I'm super happy that you said wasn't as important. Rapid fire, perspective taking. The ability to put yourself in the shoes of the other. It has always been important. It is extra important now when you lack as much information about what the other person is doing.
Beautiful. Number 2, what is the one book that every leader needs to read?
Fearless Organization by Amy Edmondson. It's an awesome, awesome book. It is critical, et cetera, et cetera. Amy's also just awesome. Yeah.
Couldn't agree more. What is your perfect song to work to?
See, this one's a problem because my range goes from listening to The Record Company, which is kind of bluesy rock, to Lamento de la Ninfa, choral stuff. I like variety. So my playlist is a mix. I'll give you a couple of those. Rita May by Record Company, Lamento de la Ninfa, Carmina Burana by Carl Orff. Depends on what mood I'm in. Mix it up, keeps things going.
Very cool. I find that different musics allow me to either focus or do a really annoying task, or I actually have playlists for different tasks.
You're much fancier than I am.
What is the perfect team size?
This is the most common question, having taught about teams for the last 20 years, most common question I've ever gotten. And I'll give you the most obnoxious answer, which is, it depends.
I know.
But here's what it depends on. You need it to be as big as it needs to be to have the skills required to do the task. Obviously, you need to have the skills. Mm-hmm. As big as it needs to be to have some amount of diversity, cognitive diversity, intellectual diversity, and then no bigger. Resist the urge for team creep, because as teams get bigger, you get more social loafing, you get less interaction overall, you get less diverse communication, and you get an exponential growth in coordination complexity. So that's your answer. The most common answer people give is 7, but it's not actually correct.
Brilliant. And our last question of the rapid fire, Mark. The future of teams is one word.
Uncertain.
That's a very, very pragmatic answer. I love that. Fantastic. Mark, that's all the time we had today. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. And I know that you gave everybody a lot to think about. And I'm pretty sure that everybody now agrees that conversations with you are always both energizing and really reassuring. So I'm very, very grateful for your time today.
Well, it's my pleasure. Likewise, it's a lot of fun. And the only thing I'll say out there to everybody, if people have follow-up questions, concerns, things that didn't get answered, things that they're wondering about, just drop me a line. My goal here is to help people to understand this stuff. So reach out, let me know. And I'm always happy to have some discussions with other interesting people.
Always generous with your time. Thanks, Mark. And a huge thank you to our listeners who tuned in and had a lot of questions. There are a few I didn't manage to get you through, so go and check them out in the comments if you want to answer them. And Mark, thank you so much for your time today, and I'll see you soon.
My pleasure. Take care, everyone.